Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we walk into Louisiana in 1835, where the air hangs thick over the Mississippi and the cane fields whisper like dry paper in the dark. You arrive where fortunes are made from sweetness, though almost none of it tastes sweet to the people forced to create it. What does survival look like in a place built to grind every hour out of a human life? What quiet methods keep a person standing when the world around them insists they are property, not flesh and thought and memory? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And as you listen tonight, comment your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights, and you step onto the river road while dawn is still a grey idea over the water. The morning feels damp enough to wear. Mist curls above the Mississippi, and the ground beneath your feet holds last night's rain like a secret. The river is broad, muddy, and patient. It slides past the plantations with a kind of indifference that would almost be funny if the place were not so cruel. Great houses stand back from the road with their columns and galleries, pretending to be graceful. Behind them stretch the fields, then the sheds, then the sugar works, and finally the cabins where enslaved families try to gather the pieces of life left to them at day's end. You smell wet earth first, then wood smoke, then the sharp green scent of cane. Even in the half-light, the plantation already feels awake. A rooster calls. Somewhere metal knocks against metal. A mule snorts in its harness. The sound of human voices carries across the yard, low and careful. No one on a sugar plantation in Louisiana gets the luxury of a slow morning. The day begins early because sugar demands it. Cane wants land, water, timing, labour, fire, and an almost theatrical amount of suffering. You move closer to the quarters, where the cabins sit in rows. They are small, rough structures of wood and mud, often with dirt floors, tiny windows, and chimneys that smoke when there is enough fuel to burn. You can almost feel the uneven boards beneath your hand, splintered from damp and years of use. Inside, the air is close. It smells of ashes, old blankets, boiled cornmeal, and the faint sweetness of molasses clinging to work clothes. A child coughs in the corner. Someone stirs embers back to life. Someone else wraps a cloth around tired feet. The simple fact of getting up each day is already an act of endurance. By 1835, Louisiana's sugar country has become one of the harshest labour regimes in the United States. Cotton is brutal, of course, but sugar has its own reputation, and not a gentle one. Travellers, planters, and even people who defended slavery sometimes admitted that sugar plantations could be especially deadly. The work was relentless, the harvest frantic, and the machinery unforgiving. Enslaved people knew this better than anyone. They did not need a visiting observer to explain it. Their bodies told them. Historians still argue whether conditions on sugar estates were consistently worse than on cotton plantations in every season. But there is no real dispute that sugar production was notoriously punishing, especially during harvest and processing. In Louisiana, the calendar pressed hard. Cane had to be planted, weeded, cut, hauled, and boiled in strict sequence. A missed window meant spoiled profits, and when profits trembled, planters usually did not blame the weather first. They blamed the people they owned. So you watch the yard come fully alive. Men, women, and children move into the morning with the practiced speed of those who no delay can bring punishment. An overseer appears on horseback, carrying the authority of a man who mistakes fear for order. His boots are polished. His expression is not. He surveys the workers with the flat look of someone counting tools. That is one of the plantation's ugliest tricks. It tries to reduce people to instruments. Yet even here, survival depends on refusing that lie inside your own mind. You see it in the smallest gestures. A woman straightens another woman's headscarf with quick fingers. An older man pauses to hand a child a heel of bread. A young boy, sleepy and solemn, leans for 1 second into his mother's side before he's sent to his task. These are not grand scenes. No violins play. Nobody delivers a speech for the ages. But these moments matter. They say, plainly and stubbornly, "You are still a person, and so am I." The fields spread out in long ranks, green and blade-like. Cane leaves can cut skin if brushed the wrong way. The rows trap heat later in the day, but now they are silvered with dew. When workers step through them, the leaves hiss softly against cloth. The sensation is cold at first, almost refreshing, until the damp settles into your sleeves and along your neck. Then it becomes just one more discomfort to carry. Sugar plantations specialize in accumulation. One ache, then another. One hunger, then another. One command, then another. Breakfast, if there is time to call it that, is often plain and quick: cornmeal, salt pork when available, molasses, sometimes fish, sometimes nothing substantial enough to satisfy the body that must labour from sunrise onward. Many enslaved people in Louisiana supplemented these meagre rations with food they grew, fished, hunted, or traded for when circumstances allowed. That practical ingenuity could mean the difference between weakness and strength. It is hard to survive on a plantation if you depend entirely on the plantation to keep you alive. That would be trusting the wolf to monitor your sheep intake. The sun lifts, and the mist begins to burn away. Light reveals more of the world and improves very little. You notice the cane fields rolling toward the horizon, the road lined with oaks, the outbuildings clustered near the mill. The sugar house stands waiting, squat and serious, with its kettles, rollers, furnaces and smoke. Even from outside it gives off an atmosphere of pressure. During grinding season, it becomes the heart of the plantation and something close to a nightmare. But even now, before the full roar of harvest, it looms over daily life. A plantation like this is not held together only by force. Force is everywhere, of course. It is in the whip, in the legal code, in the auction block that may have brought many people here. Louisiana's slave system grew from French and Spanish colonial roots, and then hardened further under American expansion. Families had often been broken by sale. Languages and customs had been torn apart and remixed under terrible conditions. Yet what makes the place function day after day is also the skill of the people trapped inside it. The planter may claim ownership, but the enslaved understand the soil, the tools, the seasons, the animals, the drainage, the cooking, the nursing, the repairs, the countless tasks without which the entire estate would sink into uselessness. That knowledge creates a quiet sort of power, not freedom, not safety, but power all the same. You begin to notice how survival lives in observation. Everyone watches. They watch the sky for rain. They watch the overseer's posture for signs of temper. They watch one another for illness, injury, exhaustion. They watch children wandering near danger. They watch cooking fires and broken handles and weak wagon wheels. On a sugar plantation, care is not abstract. Care means noticing trouble early enough to soften it. A woman bends beside a kettle outside a cabin and stirs something that smells of greens and onion. Her motions are economical. Nothing is wasted. Nearby. An elderly man carves a small wooden handle to replace one that snapped yesterday. A teenager carries water in a bucket that knocks against his leg with each step. The sound is hollow and regular. You hear a baby crying, then settling, then falling silent against someone's shoulder. Life continues in fragments. That continuity is its own kind of defiance. One quirky detail from plantation records and recollections can seem almost strange in such a grim setting. Some enslaved people kept small personal items of great importance, things like beads, polished buttons, bits of ribbon, carved charms, or worn coins. These objects might be tucked into clothing, hidden in a cabin wall, or tied into a cloth bundle. They were not valuable in the planter's accounting book. That was precisely the point. Their value belonged to the person who held them. A scrap of colour, a smooth token in the hand, a little keepsake tied to memory could steady the spirit in a world designed to strip identity away. As the day moves forward, the plantation yard fills with layered sounds. Axes strike wood, harness chains clink. A driver shouts, chickens scratch in the dirt. Somewhere a hymn is hummed under the breath, too low to attract notice, just enough to keep rhythm in the mind. You feel heat begin to rise from the earth. Louisiana does not ask permission before becoming oppressive. The air thickens until it seems to press against the chest. Sweat gathers under collars and along spines. Shirts stick to skin. Mosquitoes whine near the ditch water. You slap one and miss, naturally, and still. Amid the strain, people create forms of mutual support. One person shares advice on soothing blistered hands. Another remembers which patch of ground drains better after heavy rain. Another knows where wild herbs grow near the edge of a field. Folk medicine mattered deeply in plantation communities, especially where formal medical care was neglectful, exploitative, or both. Some remedies came from African traditions carried across the Atlantic, some from Native American knowledge, some from European practices adapted over time, and many from a blend of all three. A tea, a poultice, a salve, a whispered instruction about bark or root, or leaf could offer relief when little else did. You pass by the edge of the work gang and sense the quiet discipline required to endure. Survival is physical, yes, but also mental. You pace yourself when you can. You save your strength where possible. You keep certain thoughts hidden. You learn when silence protects you and when a few words can help someone beside you. You find ways to hold on to your own interior world, because the plantation wants that too. It wants not just labour from the hands, but surrender from the soul. Not everyone survives by the same method. Some do it through family bonds, some through prayer, some through humour so dry it barely needs water, some through stubborn pride in their skill, some through dreams of escape, some through a focus so narrow it reaches only to sundown. This too is important. Survival does not always look noble. Sometimes it looks like getting through one more morning with enough self left to greet the next. By late morning, the road is brighter, the river flashes under the sun, and the plantation appears almost picturesque from a distance. That is part of the lie Louisiana liked to tell about itself. A traveller might admire the oaks, the broad verandas, the shining water, the endless green. The landscape knows how to pose. Yet underneath that elegance is an economy built on kidnapping, sale, coercion, and exhaustion. Every polished spoon in the big house has passed, in some hidden way, through the hands of people who are denied ownership over their own lives. You stand for a moment where the cane fields meet the yard and feel the whole system breathing around you. The sweet smell from cut stalks mixes with mud, smoke, sweat, and animal musk. The ground is warm now. A fly lands on your wrist. From the cabins comes the faint scent of cooking carried on the breeze. From the river comes a wet mineral smell, heavy and deep. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs. It is quick, almost surprising. Yet there it is, a real laugh. Not because suffering has vanished, but because human beings are complicated enough to make room for a laugh even here. That may be one of the clearest truths of the plantation. Survival is not just the absence of death. It is the stubborn maintenance of feeling, memory, skill, affection, and meaning under conditions meant to crush them. In 1835 Louisiana, on these sugar estates along the Mississippi, Black Americans survive not because the system allows dignity, but because they keep making dignity anyway, in cabins, in fields, in kitchens, in gardens, in songs breathed low, in hands extended briefly at dawn before the labour bell calls them into another day. The first light has barely settled when the field gangs begin moving in full rhythm, and you feel the plantation shift from morning stillness into controlled motion. Sugar work depends on timing more than kindness, which is unfortunate because timing is abundant here and kindness is on a permanent holiday. In Louisiana, the life of the cane follows a strict cycle. By 1835, planters along the Mississippi River have learned that profit comes from close attention to seasons, rainfall, frost, drainage, and relentless labour. Enslaved people are forced to carry that burden in their muscles every single day. You walk along the edge of a cane field where the soil is dark, rich, and damp from the river country. It clings to shoes and hems. The ground smells fertile, almost sweet, with a muddy warmth rising under the sun. Sugar cane is not a delicate crop in appearance. It grows tall, jointed, and tough, with long leaves that rustle and scrape. But raising it is complicated work. The earth must be prepared carefully. Rows must be opened. Seed cane, meaning sections of mature stalk, must be laid into furrows and covered. Water must move properly through ditches. Weeds must be controlled. Livestock must be kept from trampling young growth. Nothing is simple. Though the planter's account book likes to pretend otherwise, the labour force is divided by age, strength, skill, and the planter's priorities. Strong field hands take on the heaviest tasks, though women often do the same hard work as men with no reduction in expectations. Children may scare birds, carry water, gather fodder, or assist in lighter duties until they are old enough for more demanding labour. Elderly people, if not forced into the fields, might mend tools, mind children, cook, or perform other tasks the plantation still intends to squeeze from them. It is a system with endless appetite. If a person can move, the plantation assumes a use can be found. You hear hoes striking the earth in a steady pattern, metal hits soil, soil shifts. The sound repeats until it becomes almost musical, though no one would confuse it with entertainment. Each stroke lifts the smell of fresh dirt into the heavy air. Sweat forms early. Louisiana does not believe in easing you into discomfort. The humidity wraps around the body at breakfast and stays until dark, like an especially rude guest who has mistaken your suffering for hospitality. During the planting season, labour begins with preparing the land. Cane rows stretch long and straight, because efficiency matters to men who measure everything except conscience. Workers clear debris, shape furrows, and place cane cuttings into the ground at careful intervals. Timing matters because the crop must mature before the colder months threaten it. A serious frost can damage cane badly. That seasonal urgency affects everyone on the plantation, especially the enslaved people whose lives are organised around the planter's fear of lost yield. Yet survival in the fields is not only about enduring orders, it is also about mastering the work itself. Enslaved labourers develop a precise understanding of local land and weather. They know which patches flood first after rain. They know where the soil stays loose and where it compacts hard enough to jar the wrists with every strike. They know how long standing water can sit before roots begin to suffer. They know when clouds are empty and when they mean trouble. This practical knowledge is learned through repetition, but also through community. Younger workers observe older ones. Advice passes quietly from hand to hand. A person might save strength, avoid injury, or protect a crop simply because someone nearby has seen the same problem 10 times before. A mainstream historical fact stands clearly here. Louisiana sugar expanded rapidly in the early 19th century, and by the 1830s it had become one of the most profitable plantation industries in the South. That prosperity rested on forced labour, and on increasingly sophisticated methods of processing cane. Behind the grand houses and polished silver lay fields full of exhausting agricultural work, performed by enslaved black people whose skill was essential and whose humanity was denied by law. As the crop grows, the work changes. Hoeing becomes crucial. Weeds compete with young cane for nutrients and moisture, so gangs move through the rows, clearing unwanted growth under the rising sun. It is repetitive work, and the repetition can be deceptive. A stranger might think repetition dulls the mind. Often it sharpens it. You count strokes. You track distance. You watch the overseer's route. You note which workers are faltering and which are holding steady. You save a swallow of water when possible. You adjust your grip to spare a blister from breaking. The body learns economies that are never written down. Sometimes the smallest adjustment means a great deal. A strip of cloth wrapped around the palm, a pause timed to the movement of a mule team, a shift in posture to protect the lower back, a warning murmured about a hidden hole near the ditch. These are survival skills, not dramatic, not heroic in the theatrical sense, but they matter. Plantation life is full of hazards that flourish in plain sight. One odd detail recorded in descriptions of cane culture is how people sometimes use the leaves and byproducts of the crop in practical little ways beyond field labour. Cane trash, meaning dry leaves and remnants, could serve as fuel, bedding filler, or material for quick patching when nothing better was available. It was not luxury by any stretch. It was improvisation. On a plantation, almost every scrap is judged for usefulness, especially by the people given the fewest resources. By midday, the heat settles with serious intent. The cane rows hold warm air between them. Insects stir. Gnats drift near damp ground, and mosquitoes rise from ditches in lazy, irritating clouts. Your shirt sticks to your skin. The back of your neck burns. Hands tighten around tool handles, polished smooth by constant use. Water becomes precious, though not always provided in comfort or abundance. Hunger lingers too. A body spending long hours in field labour needs calories, salt, and rest. The plantation usually offers less than enough of all three. Historians continue to debate how much flexibility enslaved workers had in shaping the pace of labour during ordinary seasons, since evidence differs across plantations and individual managers. Some estates enforced every movement with brutal closeness. Others allowed small, informal patterns to develop so long as quotas were met. But on sugar plantations, the general pattern remains clear. The work demanded speed, endurance, and close supervision, especially when the crop neared maturity. The margin for delay narrowed as harvest approached. In the midst of such strain, conversation still flickers through the labour, not constant chatter. That would draw attention quickly. But bits of speech survive. A joke slips out. A warning travels down a row. Someone identifies a bird overhead by its call. Someone else mutters an opinion about the weather with all the gravity of a statesman and slightly better judgment. Humour persists because people persist. It is one of the least appreciated agricultural tools in history. You notice how labour is also shaped by gender without being softened by it. Women in cane fields plant, weed, carry, and cut. Some return from field work to cooking, washing, mending, and caring for children late into the night. Pregnancy does not reliably reduce expectations. Motherhood does not guarantee rest. The plantation extracts labour from women twice over, in field production and in sustaining household life under conditions of deprivation. That double burden is one reason survival depended so deeply on mutual support among women in the quarters and the fields. Children absorb this world early. A very young child may begin with errands or small tasks. An older child watches adults and learns not only how to work but how to read danger. Which driver is quick to strike? Which mule kicks? Which ditch bank collapses after rain? Which hours feel longest? Childhood on a sugar plantation is not free of play, because children are still children, but it's crowded by responsibility and fear. A scrap of string becomes a toy, a stick becomes a horse, laughter appears, then vanishes when work cools again. You come to an irrigation ditch where the water moves slowly, carrying bits of leaf and reflected sky. Drainage matters enormously in this country. South Louisiana can be rich and wet at the same time, which is useful for crops until it becomes destructive. Enslaved workers dig, clear, and maintain the channels that keep fields from drowning. Mud sucks at ankles, shovels bite into the bank. The smell here is stronger, with standing water, moss, and rot mixing into a dense river smell. Frogs vanish into the reeds at your approach. A dragonfly skims the surface in a blink of blue. These drainage systems are one more reminder that the plantation's supposed order is built from labour most planters scarcely acknowledge properly. The landscape itself is engineered by the enslaved. Fields, roads, levees, ditches, fences, sheds, carts, and animal paths all bear the marks of their effort. The white owner may sign deeds and boast at dinner, but the daily making of the place belongs to people he claims as property. That contradiction lies at the centre of the sugar world. As the season turns and cane grows high, attention shifts toward harvest. This is when the pace becomes even more severe. Cane must be cut before damaging cold arrives, and once cut it begins to lose quality. That creates extraordinary pressure. Field labour and factory labour merge, because stalks must move rapidly from rows to mill. Enslaved workers know what is coming long before the first knife swings. You can feel it in the way tools are checked, carts repaired, animals watched, and instructions sharpened. The plantation seems to inhale. Cutting cane is dangerous work. The stalks are chopped low, stripped of leaves, and bundled for transport. Knives flash. Leaves slice exposed skin. Hands cramp. Arms ache from the repeated motion. The ground grows sticky with juice and littered with sharp fragments. Dust and fibres cling to sweat. If the weather turns cold and damp, Fingers stiffen while the work somehow becomes no less urgent. Sugar is a crop that manages to be miserable in several directions at once. The sounds of harvest are different from planting. More chopping, more carts rattling, more shouted timing between field and mill, mules strain in harness, and wagon wheels grind ruts deeper into the road. The smell changes too. Fresh-cut cane gives off a grassy sweetness, but around the works it mingles with smoke, hot metal, and the first thick notes of boiling juice. Even before you enter the industrial side of the plantation, the air announces that the crop is moving from field to furnace. Food during these labour peaks matters terribly. Extra nourishment could help people endure, and many enslaved families relied on gardens, fishing, hunting, or trading to add variety and strength to their diets whenever possible. Sweet potatoes, beans, greens, corn, poultry, or fish could mean the difference between mere survival and collapse. Plantation rations alone were often monotonous and insufficient for such extreme workloads. The system expected tremendous output while investing only grudgingly in the bodies producing it. A familiar habit, really, among people who confuse ownership with competence. Still, not every moment in the field is ruled by command. There are tiny pockets of personal judgment. A worker chooses the order of tasks inside a row. Someone saves a stronger motion for the tougher patch of ground. Someone else shares a trick for tying a bundle tighter. Skill creates room, even if only a little, and little things matter here. A little room to think, a little room to breathe, a little room to help another person stand upright through the day. By late afternoon, the light turns warmer and lower across the cane. Shadows fall long between the rows, bodies slow, though the official pace does not. The smell of trampled leaves hangs close to the earth. Somewhere near the road, a cart creaks under its load, and a mule shakes its harness with a dull jingle of chain. The sky over the river broadens into gold, then soft copper. Beauty remains in the landscape, rather inconveniently for the plantation system, because the world still insists on being lovely, even where people have tried so hard to make it cruel. What you understand here is that survival in the sugar fields begins with knowledge joined to endurance. It lives in weather sense, hand skill, pacing, food gathering, water sharing, tool mending, and the quiet passing of experience between generations. It lives in muscles trained by force, yet guided by intelligence. It lives in bodies pushed to the edge and minds still alert enough to adapt. In 1835, Louisiana, the plantation tries to turn the growing season into a machine of obedience. But in the rows, among the mud, heat, insects, and green stalks, Black Americans survive by knowing far more than the system ever intended them to know, and by using that knowledge every day under a sun that asks no questions and offers no mercy. By the time the cane reaches the mill, the plantation stops feeling merely agricultural and starts feeling industrial in the most unsettling way. You leave the open field and step toward the sugar works, where heat, steam, noise, and haste gather under one roof. This is where the crop must be crushed, strained, boiled, skimmed, and reduced before it spoils. The whole place hums with urgency. Outside, the cane rustles in the breeze like a dry whisper. Inside, the machinery growls, clanks, and hisses like a beast with poor manners and no patience at all. The mill building is thick with smell. Fresh cane juice gives off a green sweetness at first, almost pleasant, like wet grass and crushed stalks. Then other odours rise to meet it. Smoke from the furnaces, hot metal, ash, sweat, damp wood, sour foam from boiling vats. The air feels sticky on your face and heavy in your lungs. Every breath seems to carry a little heat with it. On cooler days, steam curls out into the yard. On warmer ones, the heat simply sits on the skin like a hand that refuses to lift. Sugar making is not one task. It is a chain of tasks, each one timed to the next. Cane is hauled in from the fields and fed through rollers that press out the juice. The crushed stalks, called bags, are often dried and burned as fuel for the furnaces, so even the leftovers are denied a peaceful retirement. Juice runs into troughs or cisterns, then toward the boiling room. There it is heated in a sequence of kettles, each stage concentrating the liquid further. Workers skim off impurities, watch temperature, judge texture, and move the syrup at the right moment. If any part of the process goes wrong, the sugar can be ruined. That makes the labour here both physical and technical. A mainstream historical fact stands out with uncomfortable clarity. By the 1830s, Louisiana sugar plantations had developed increasingly complex processing systems, often using steam-powered mills or animal-driven rollers, and successful sugar production depended on constant labour in both field and factory spaces. Enslaved workers did not simply cut cane. They powered an entire manufacturing operation that required timing, knowledge, and endurance at every stage. You enter the mill yard and hear the rhythm first. Wagons arrive with the loads of cane and tip their contents into piles. Mules stamp and snort. Drivers shout. Men seize armfuls of stalks and feed them into the rollers with practiced speed. The machine grips and crushes with a sound like wet timber splitting. Juice spills out in streams. Fibres spray. The floor grows slick underfoot. If you place a hand against a post, you feel the vibration running through the wood. Nothing here is calm. Every surface seems to tremble with labour. This is one of the most dangerous places on the plantation. Rollers can catch hands, sleeves, or loose fabric in an instant. A moment of fatigue can mean crushed fingers, mangled arms, or death. There are accounts from sugar regions describing workers pulled into the machinery, and the fear of it lives in the room even when no accident occurs. Everyone knows the risk. Everyone watches the rollers. Yet the work does not slow. Sugar has no respect for caution when profit is involved. You notice how skill changes the way people move. An experienced hand feeds cane into the rollers with quick, precise motions, keeping the body angled just far enough from danger. Another worker clears debris before it causes a jam. Someone else gauges how fast the wagons must unload to keep the mill supplied without creating chaos in the yard. None of this is random. Survival inside the sugar works depends on learning the machine's appetite and never forgetting it. The boiling house is worse in a different way. The noise drops a little, but the heat rises sharply. Rows of kettles stand over furnaces, each one holding cane juice at a different stage of reduction. Fire glows beneath iron. Steam blurs the air. Men skim froth from the surface with long-handled tools and transfer liquid from one kettle to another. Their arms and faces shine with sweat. Light from the flames flickers across the walls, turning the whole room into a restless orange haze. The sensation on your skin is immediate. Heat presses against the cheeks, the eyelids, the wrists. Your throat feels dry even while the air itself seems wet. Boiling cane juice sounds simple until you stand beside it. The liquid spits. Foam rises. Bubbles break with sudden little bursts that can send hot syrup onto the hand or forearm. A misjudged lift strains the back. A splash can burn deep. Workers must judge thickness by sight, motion, and experience. Too thin, and the batch is not ready. Too thick, and it may scorch or crystallize poorly. The planter may own the kettles, but the enslaved workers are the ones who make them useful. Some plantations used a sugar master, often a skilled specialist, to supervise the refining process. Yet even where a white sugar maker claimed expertise, enslaved assistants carried much of the real burden. They handled fuel, moved liquid, cleaned vessels, watched consistency, and worked through long shifts without relief. The knowledge of enslaved workers could be remarkably exact, though rarely acknowledged with the dignity it deserved. The plantation system loved expertise right up until it belonged to the wrong person. Historians continued to dispute how much autonomy enslaved workers in sugar houses had over technical decisions, because records often credit white managers while overlooking the people actually doing the labour. But there is strong reason to believe that experienced black workers developed deep process knowledge and sometimes made crucial judgments on timing and quality, especially during the exhausting pace of grinding season. A machine may be made of iron, but it still depends on human perception. The work often runs long into the night once harvest begins in earnest. Cane cannot wait politely until morning. Once cut, it must be processed quickly, and that means the mill and boiling house may operate with barely a pause. Night labour in the sugar works has its own atmosphere. Outside, darkness settles over the fields and the river. Inside, furnace light pulses under kettles while shadows shift across beams and walls. Smoke drifts upward. The smell of caramelizing syrup thickens. Workers move half-lit and half-hidden, their faces glowing in firelight before vanishing again into steam. It is eerie, exhausting, and strangely beautiful for a place built on coercion. Beauty here is not kindness. That distinction matters. The physical toll is immense. Eyes sting from smoke. Feet ache from standing on damp boards or packed floors for hours. Hands become sticky with juice, rough with ash, and sore from gripping tools. Clothing traps heat and moisture until it feels heavier than it should. You can imagine the relief of stepping outside for even a moment, breathing river air instead of furnace air, feeling cooler darkness on the skin. Yet breaks are limited, and urgency presses everyone back in. One quirky detail from sugar making is that the byproducts had lives of their own. Molasses, the thick dark syrup left after sugar crystallization, could be used for food, for trade, and eventually for making rum in broader Atlantic economies. On the plantation, it also flavoured the daily diet of the enslaved, sometimes making its way into rations or cooking. It is a strange irony. The same industry that consumed their labour also produced one of the few sweet tastes many enslaved people might regularly know. In the curing room, sugar crystals are separated and dried in forms or containers, and the product begins its journey toward market. Barrels wait, workers shovel, lift, scrape, and pack. Fine grains cling to the skin. Damp sugar smells different from boiling syrup, less green and more earthy sweet, with a faint sharpness underneath. The room may be less fiery than the boiling house, but it still demands strength and speed. Everywhere on the sugar plantation, one finished task simply becomes the beginning of another. The social atmosphere inside the works is tense but not silent. Instructions move across the room in clipped phrases. Warnings come fast when something slips or overheats. At the same time, people find narrow ways to support each other. A worker shifts position to take a harder angle at the kettle. Someone quietly points out a safer grip on a tool handle. Another nudges a bucket closer to spare a trip across a slick floor. These are small acts, but in a dangerous place, small acts can preserve a life. You also see how gender shapes labour here without imposing strict simplicity. Men are often assigned to the heaviest mill and boiling tasks, especially where great upper body force is needed. But women may also labour in processing areas, carrying, cleaning, skimming, or assisting with demanding work near the furnaces. The plantation assigns labour according to need, convenience, and cruelty more than any tidy rule. Wherever the work is needed, bodies are sent. The sugar works create a particular form of mental strain. In the fields, pain comes from repetition across open space. In the mill, danger is concentrated. You must stay alert to belts, rollers, fire, and timing all at once. Fatigue becomes its own hazard. A tired arm lifts too slowly. A tired foot slips on spilled juice. A tired mind misses the way foam is rising too fast in the kettle. The plantation does not reduce risk when workers are exhausted. It increases demand instead. Remarkable management style if the goal is panic and injury. You can sense the hierarchy even in the building's layout. White supervisors circulate, watching for delays and waste. Skilled positions may bring slightly better treatment or more consistent clothing, but not freedom. The enslaved worker closest to the machinery may be indispensable and still fully vulnerable to sale, punishment, or replacement. That is one of slavery's core obscenities. It can depend completely on a person's competence while refusing to recognize that person's claim to selfhood. Yet identity survives here too, though in quieter forms than the plantation would prefer. A worker hums under his breath while waiting for a kettle to settle. Another wears a scrap of cloth tied at the wrist. Practical perhaps, but also personal. Someone tells a brief joke during a wagon pause and earns a tired grin. Human feeling remains present in the room, not because conditions allow it generously, but because people carry it in anyway. Night work deepens the sense of enclosure. The windows show darkness. Sparks rise when fuel is thrown into the furnace. The kettles glow at the rims, shadows lengthen across the floorboards. Outside, insects buzz against the walls, drawn by warmth and light. Inside, the smell of cooked syrup grows almost overwhelming, sweet enough to border on sickening after hours of exposure. Your skin feels salted with sweat. Your ears ring with the repetitive sounds of clatter, boiling, scraping, and shouted instruction. Time stretches strangely in such a place. Minutes feel long. Hours vanish. For many enslaved people, survival in the sugar works required more than strength. It required pattern recognition, emotional control, and close cooperation. You had to know when the rollers might jam, when the fire needed feeding, when a kettle was near its next stage, when a co-worker was moving too close to danger, when your own body was nearing its limit. These judgments happened constantly and often wordlessly. They formed an intelligence of labour that the plantation relied upon but rarely recorded. The irony is bitter. Sugar leaves the plantation as a refined commodity associated with luxury, gentility, and polished tables. It may sweeten tea in a city drawing room or crown desserts at a wealthy dinner. By the time it reaches those places, the smoke, burns, fatigue, and risk that shaped it are hidden completely. The product looks neat. The process never was. As the shift drags on, the workers' bodies tell the truth the barrels never will. Shoulders sag, faces shine with heat, hands tighten and release around handles to keep numbness away. Backs protest each bend and lift. Still the wagons come, still the rollers turn, still the kettles boil. The sugar house is a place where labour is transformed into commodity so quickly that suffering itself seems to vaporize into the steam, and yet it does not vanish. It remains in memory, in scar tissue, in learned caution, in the silent exchange of help between workers navigating one more night around the rollers and fires. In 1835, Louisiana, black Americans survived the sugar works by turning knowledge into protection wherever they could. They read machines, fire, texture, and each other. They preserved one another with warnings, adjustments, shared skill, and sheer determination in a place where one misstep could alter a life forever. The boiling house demanded exactness without mercy. The people inside met that demand with intelligence the plantation could exploit but never truly possess. Night settles over the plantation with a softness that almost hides how little rest it truly brings. The fields darken first, then the road, then the broad yard between the works and the quarters. Firelight begins to replace daylight. Smoke drifts low and blue from cabin chimneys. Frogs call from the ditches. Crickets take up their steady music in the grass. After the heat and noise of the day, the cabins seem quieter, but not idle. This is the hour when another kind of labour begins. The labour of holding a family together with almost nothing. You walk toward the quarters and feel the ground cool slightly underfoot. The air still carries dampness from the river country, thick with earth, ash, and the faint sweet smell of cane clinging to clothes and skin. Cabins stand in rows, small and weathered, their walls patched with boards, clay, moss, and whatever else could fill a gap against wind or rain. Roof lines sag, doorways lean, tiny windows let out a little smoke and almost no heat. Seen from a distance, they look simple. Up close, they look improvised, repaired, and fought for. Inside one cabin, the room is dim except for the fire and a small tallow flame. Light catches the rim of a pot, the curve of a wooden spoon, the edge of a stool with one mended leg. A blanket or hanging cloth divides part of the room, offering the nearest thing to privacy. The floor is packed earth, swept but uneven. Beds are pallets or rough frames filled with corn husks, straw, scraps of cloth, or Spanish moss when available. A few bowls sit on a shelf. A bundle of herbs hangs drying near the hearth. A child's small carved toy rests beside the wall, set down only because sleep will come eventually. The cabin smells alive. Cornmeal cooking on the hearth, greens simmering in a pot, smoke caught in blankets and hair, damp clothes drying near the fire, soap, faint and harsh, human sweat, pine kindling, maybe a little onion if someone has managed to save one. These smells are not refined, but they are intimate. They belong to people making use of the little space and little time they can call their own. A mainstream historical fact is that enslaved families and kin groups in Louisiana often had to perform extensive domestic labour after the official workday ended. Cooking, washing, mending, tending children, caring for the ill, and maintaining the cabin all took place in hours the planter did not count as work. The plantation could seize daylight labour by force, but it still depended on enslaved people to sustain themselves and one another each night. You see a woman kneeling near the hearth, stirring a pot with the patience of someone too tired to hurry badly. Beside her, another person rubs a shirt against a washboard in a basin, the water already grey. A boy shells beans into a bowl. An older girl braids a smaller child's hair by firelight, drawing the comb slowly so the tangles do not hurt quite so much. In the corner, an elderly man binds a cracked handle on a hoe with twine and leather. No one is idle. They cannot afford to be. Yet the room feels different from the field because the motions here belong to care. Meals matter deeply in the quarters. Plantation rations might include cornmeal, salt pork, molasses, and sometimes small allowances of other food, but they were rarely enough in quantity, variety, or nourishment for people labouring in fields and mills, so survival often depended on supplementing those rations through gardens, fishing, trapping, or exchanging goods. At night, whatever has been gathered must be turned into supper. Cornmeal becomes pone or mush. Greens are stewed with fat if any can be spared. Fish is cleaned and cooked. Sweet potatoes roast in the coals. A small piece of meat flavours a whole pot, because flavour must often do the work of abundance. The soundscape of the quarters is gentle compared with the sugar house, but it has its own richness. A spoon knocks against iron. Water splashes into a basin. A baby fusses and is soothed. Someone coughs in the next cabin. Someone laughs, briefly, with the dry sound of a person who has earned that laugh the hard way. Low voices rise and fall. Sometimes a song is hummed, not for performance but for steadiness. Sometimes someone recites a line of scripture from memory, or repeats a story heard long ago. Night lets words travel differently. They are softer, but they sink deeper. Historians still debate how much privacy enslaved families could actually maintain in plantation quarters, because housing arrangements varied widely, and records often flatten the complexity of household life. Some families lived together in separate cabins. Others shared space with relatives or unrelated individuals. Sales, deaths, and forced movement fractured households constantly. But even within those unstable conditions, people formed bonds of kinship that extended beyond the narrow legal notion of family. A child might be cared for by an aunt, a grandmother, a neighbour, or someone not related by blood at all. Slavery tried to break family. People kept rebuilding it anyway. Touch is everywhere in the cabin. A hand presses a cloth to a sore shoulder, fingers part hair into neat rows, someone rubs tallow into a cracked heel. A child curls against an adult's side under a shared blanket. A shirt passes from one lap to another for patching. These ordinary gestures matter. After a day spent under surveillance and command, touch in the quarters can become a language of reassurance. You are hurt, and someone notices. You are tired, and someone makes room. You're still here, and someone reaches for you. Children change the rhythm of night. Even when exhausted, adults must feed them, wash them, calm them, teach them, and guard what little innocence remains. A little girl leans sleepily against her mother while chewing a piece of corn cake. A boy whispers questions about tomorrow and receives answers too soft to fully hear. Stories often become part of the evening, not only for comfort but for teaching. Through tales, children learn caution, humour, morality, and memory. They learn who people are. They learn who they are meant to remain, even in a system determined to define them otherwise. One quirky detail from cabin life appears in the small objects people treasured and made by hand. Archaeologists and historians have found evidence of beads, pierced coins, carved bone pieces, shells, buttons, and little charms kept in quarters across the South. Such objects could serve as decoration, memory, spiritual protection, or simple personal pleasure. In a world where ownership was violently restricted, a tiny possession could carry enormous emotional weight: a blue bead sewn into cloth, a smooth shell tucked on a shelf, a carved peg made with care. These were not luxuries. They were anchors. The work of clothing repair takes a surprising amount of attention. Plantation garments wore out quickly under cane labour, damp weather, and repeated washing. A ripped seam, a torn sleeve, or a worn shoe could turn tomorrow's labour into misery. So night brings thread, patches, scraps, and ingenuity. A woman turns an old shirt inside out to get a little more use from the less frayed side. A child's garment is let down to fit growing legs. Soles are stuffed or retied. Clothing becomes a long argument against disintegration. You notice the ways older people contribute to survival in the quarters. An elderly woman may know which leaves ease a fever or which tea helps a stomach calm. An older man may remember how to shape a new handle, mend a trap, or patch a roof seam before the next rain. Their bodies may no longer meet the plantation's cruel standard for peak labour, but their knowledge remains indispensable. In the cabin, skill does not vanish when strength changes form. It shifts into teaching, tending, and memory. Illness casts a long shadow through these night hours. Plantation life made sickness common through overwork, poor diet, damp housing, and inadequate medical care. A cough can linger for weeks. A fever can rise suddenly. A cut from cane or iron can turn bad. Since formal treatment from plantation doctors was inconsistent and often driven by the owner's financial interest rather than the patient's comfort, enslaved communities leaned heavily on their own healing traditions. Poultices, teas, roots, salves, cooling cloths, and practical nursing mattered immensely. Someone sits awake with the sick while others sleep. Someone feeds a child spoonful by spoonful. Someone knows which plant by the ditch is worth gathering at first light. The cabins also hold room for courtship and married life, though slavery made both deeply precarious. Husbands and wives might live together, or on neighbouring plantations, or under constant threat of separation through sale. Even so, people sought love, partnership, and tenderness. A man returns late and sits close to his wife while they share a quiet meal from the same bowl. A young couple speaks in low voices near the doorway while others pretend not to hear. A woman folds away a scrap of ribbon that was given to her and smiles without making a show of it. Affection survives because people insist on it. Humour survives too. It is often dry, sly, and quick. Someone teases a boy about how slowly he shelled those beans. Someone remarks that the plantation mule looks better fed than most Christians. Another person replies that the mule has the advantage of not being asked to stir the supper. The room chuckles. Nothing changes, and yet something does. Humour loosens fear for a moment. It reminds people that the oppressor does not own every corner of thought. The atmosphere outside the cabins grows deeper as the night advances. Moonlight catches the edges of fences and puddles. Smoke thins into the trees, somewhere farther down the row. A group of voices rises in song, low and blended, then fades again. The melody drifts through the dark with the smell of wood smoke and wet ground. It is not a public concert. It is a way of breathing together. Sound can make a small room feel larger than its walls. There are also conversations that carry practical intelligence. Who is ill? Which patch of garden did best? Whose child needs shoes? Which overseer is in a temper? What repairs must be done on Sunday if any time can be found? Which woman is near childbirth? Whether the river is rising? These exchanges create a web of information more reliable than anything offered by the plantation hierarchy. Survival depends on knowing things early and sharing them quietly. Sleep, when it comes, is uneven. Some collapse almost at once onto pallets that rustle with straw or husks. Others stay awake longer, rubbing sore joints, feeding the fire, nursing a child, or simply letting the day loosen its grip on the mind. The cabin cools by degrees. Ash settles. Breathing steadies. Outside, insects keep time. The body longs for rest. But true rest is hard in a place where dawn will demand everything again. Still, people carve what comfort they can from blanket, closeness, and habit. What becomes clear in the quarters is that survival is made from repeated acts of care so ordinary they can be overlooked by anyone not paying attention. a pot watched so supper does not burn, a shirt mended before it splits wider, a child bathed in a basin, a fever checked by hand in the dark, a prayer murmured over a sleeping room, a joke shared across weariness, a roof patch hammered into place before rain, a bead sewn back onto cloth because beauty deserves at least one more day. In 1835, Louisiana, black Americans survived the plantation not only in the cane rows and boiling houses, but in these cabins after dark, where domestic work became protection, affection became resistance, and community took material form in food, cloth, fire, and touch. The quarters were small, crowded, and fragile. Yet within them, people built warmth out of scarcity and meaning out of exhaustion. Night did not erase the plantation's power, but it allowed human bonds to gather close enough to endure. Morning on the plantation does not wait for anyone to feel ready, but by now you have begun to notice something important. Survival is not made only from strength, it is made from knowledge, from habits refined over years, from seeing small openings where the system sees only labour. On a Louisiana sugar plantation in 1835, skills can protect a body, feed a family, soothe an illness, reduce punishment, and preserve a little personal authority in a world designed to deny all of it. Power here is quiet. It rarely announces itself. It lives in useful hands and attentive minds. You move through the yard as the day begins and watch how many kinds of work are held together by skill. A carpenter squares a board with quick, exact cuts. A blacksmith lifts glowing iron and shapes it with steady blows while sparks leap into the dim air. A woman judges a pot over the fire with one glance and one stir. A driver knows how to harness a mule without wasting motion. A field hand tests the edge of a blade with a thumb, not enough to cut, just enough to know. None of this is accidental. Plantation life depends on expertise even while refusing to honour the people who possess it. A mainstream historical fact is that enslaved people on southern plantations often held specialised roles beyond field labour. In Louisiana, sugar country, enslaved workers could serve as carpenters, coopers, blacksmiths, teamsters, sugar boilers, cattle minders, domestics, seamstresses, nurses, and healers. These skilled roles were economically valuable to the plantation, and the people in them often developed knowledge that owners relied upon heavily. Even as those same owners denied them autonomy and legal personhood, you can feel the difference between brute force and practiced ability in almost every task. A cooper shaping staves for a barrel does not merely hammer wood together. He reads grain, moisture, tension, and fit. A badly made barrel leaks sugar or molasses and costs money. A blacksmith must judge heat by colour and timing by instinct. A woman who cooks for many people measures not with a scale but with memory, hand size, and experience. A healer sorting dried plants near the cabin wall knows which leaves calm the stomach, which roots ease fever, and which bark helps a wound stay clean. None of these skills are decorative. They are protective. The plantation yard has its own morning orchestra. Hammers ring from the smithy in sharp, bright notes. A saw rasps through wood. Chickens scratch and fuss in the dust. A mule snorts and stamps beside a cart. Someone shakes out a blanket. Someone else carries a bucket of water, the handle knocking softly against the side. The air smells of charcoal smoke, damp boards, animal sweat, and the faint sweetness of cane residue clinging to everything. The touch of the morning is cool at first, but the humidity is already waiting, promising later discomfort with the confidence of something that has never once failed. Among the most important forms of hidden power is agricultural knowledge outside the planter's official commands. Enslaved people know which patches of garden soil stay productive, which weeds can be eaten, which fish gather in shallow water after rain, which trees give useful nuts or shade, and which herbs grow near fences or ditches. These things may sound modest compared with the grand machinery of sugar production, but they shape daily survival far more directly. A small patch of beans, a handful of wild greens, a fish caught at dusk, a fever eased by tea. These are the quiet victories that keep people going. Historians continue to debate how much planters consciously recognize the depth of enslaved expertise. because owners often praised a worker's usefulness without acknowledging the intellectual labour behind it. The written record is full of blind spots. A ledger might note that a cooper made barrels, but not the years of learning required. A journal may mention a nurse attending the sick, but not the trust she earned in the quarters or the remedies she knew by heart. What survives in documents is often thinner than the life that produced it. One of the subtler ways skill offers protection is through bargaining space, however limited. A person who is difficult to replace may sometimes gain better clothing, steadier rations, a less punishing assignment, or a slightly wider margin in daily treatment. None of that means safety. It does not undo the violence of slavery. But within the narrow world the plantation creates, expertise can sometimes make an owner hesitate before using a person up completely. An experienced sugar boiler, a strong carpenter, a trusted midwife, or a skilled driver may hold a precarious value that opens tiny practical advantages. Tiny is the key word here. You stop near the blacksmith's shop and feel its heat reach you before you enter. Inside, the forge glows orange and white. Iron rests on the anvil, bright at the edges. Each hammer blow sends a tremor through the air. The smell is metallic, smoky, and dry. Ash dust settles on sleeves. The blacksmith's arms shine with sweat as he turns the iron and strikes again, shaping a hinge, a hook, a chain link, perhaps a tool part that the field gangs will need by noon. The whole plantation depends on repairs. Without mended blades, sound wagon fittings, shoeing for animals, and replaced bolts, the machinery of sugar falters quickly. Skilled repair work matters because the plantation is always wearing itself out. Wood splits, leather cracks, iron bends, barrels leak, roofs sag, handles break, harness straps fray. The environment does not help. Louisiana is damp, hot, stormy, and muddy by turns. Materials swell, rot, rust, and come loose. Enslaved artisans keep this unstable world functioning. Their craftsmanship becomes a form of stewardship forced upon them, yet still carried out with care because broken tools and failing structures make everyone's lives harder. One quirky detail from plantation life is how often useful objects were remade from scraps. A bent nail might be straightened and used again. Old cloth could become patches, head wraps, bandages, or baby ties. Broken pottery might be repurposed in hearths or yards. Worn barrels might be cut down into tubs or storage bins. This was partly thrift imposed by scarcity and partly creativity sharpened by necessity. Waste was a luxury that enslaved people were rarely allowed, so resourcefulness became almost second nature. You walk toward a garden patch near the quarters, and the atmosphere shifts from workshop precision to living green abundance on a small scale. Here the soil is loose, dark, and carefully tended. Rows of greens, beans, squash, or sweet potatoes push up through the earth. There may be herbs near the edges, onions in a corner, perhaps a few flowers tucked in because beauty should not need official permission. Gardens offered more than food. They offered a little control over time, skill, and outcome. To plant something, tend it, and watch it grow under your own hand is no small thing in a life ruled by others. Women often carried tremendous knowledge in these spaces. They managed cooking, preservation, kitchen gardens, childcare, nursing, and textile repair, all while also labouring in fields or other plantation tasks. Their expertise sustained households in ways planters scarcely measured. A woman might know how to stretch a ration, calm a sick child, save seeds, preserve beans, braid hair neatly for work, and sew a garment strong enough to endure cane leaves and hard washing. That is not ordinary domesticity. It is a whole architecture of survival. You notice how often children learn through watching rather than formal instruction. A girl stands near an older woman and learns how to sort herbs by smell and leaf shape. A boy watches a man shave wood with a draw knife and begins to understand how pressure changes the cut. Another child carries scraps, gathers kindling, or counts eggs, absorbing the logic of household and field long before adulthood. Knowledge moves along family lines, neighbourhood lines, and lines of affection. It is taught in passing, in correction, in repetition, in the phrase "not like that, like this." Spiritual knowledge also takes practical forms. A person may keep a protective charm hidden in clothing, say certain prayers at moments of danger, or combine Christian practice with older African-derived understandings of luck, healing, and unseen forces. Louisiana, with its French, Spanish, African, and Caribbean influences, held a particularly layered cultural world. Not every belief can be neatly traced now, and historians are careful about overclaiming. Still, there is strong evidence that enslaved communities preserved rich mixtures of religious and folk practices that helped people make sense of suffering and seek protection in daily life. Healing knowledge deserves special attention because it sits at the meeting point of body, memory, and community trust. You step near a cabin where herbs hang drying from rafters. The smell is sharp and earthy, with mint, camphor, roots, and smoke mixed together. On a shelf lies a jar of rendered fat for salves, a pouch of dried leaves, a cloth bundle tied with string. A woman crushes something in a mortar while speaking softly to a child with a cough. Another person wraps a poultice for a swollen joint. This is medicine as practiced under pressure, often without formal tools, but not without expertise. Some healers knew plants from African traditions carried through generations. Others adapted to Louisiana flora, learning from native knowledge, European remedies, or experience shared within the quarters. Most likely many practices blended across these lines. The result was a practical medical culture that addressed fevers, stomach troubles, skin problems, wounds, childbirth, and exhaustion with whatever could be found and trusted. Plantation doctors might appear for serious illness, but everyday health often rested in the hands of enslaved women and men who had earned confidence through results. You can also see how social skill protects people. Not every defense is material. Some survival depends on reading moods, speaking carefully, avoiding open conflict at the wrong moment, and knowing which requests can be made safely. A person who understands the overseer's temper, the mistress's vanity, or the driver's habits may navigate the day with fewer dangers. That is not submission. It is strategy. The plantation forces constant emotional calculation, and many enslaved people became experts in presenting one face while preserving another inside. The same applies to timing. Timing a break, timing a question, timing a repair so it is noticed, timing a silence so it is not mistaken for defiance, timing a warning to a neighbour before the overseer turns the corner. Skill in timing is almost invisible unless you live within the pressure that makes it necessary. On a sugar plantation, where so much depends on season and sequence, people learn to think in moments as well as days. You pass a woman sewing by daylight near a doorway, her fingers moving steadily through coarse cloth. The garment she's making or repairing is plain, but the stitching is strong and neat. Beside her sits a basket filled with scraps sorted by size and colour. The texture of the fabric is rough under your fingers when she lets you touch a piece, thick enough to endure hard wear, though never soft enough to feel kind. Clothing work may look quiet, but it shapes survival in direct ways. A well-wrapped head protects against sun. A mended sleeve guards the arm from cuts. A sturdy seam saves a garment from failing in the field. There is dignity in mastery, even when the world refuses to acknowledge it properly. That dignity shows in posture, in economy of motion, in the calm confidence of someone who knows exactly how a task should be done. The plantation can steal time, freedom, wages, and security. It cannot fully prevent a person from knowing they are good at something. That inner fact matters more than an owner would ever understand. By afternoon the yard is warm and bright, shadows pulled close beneath wagons and trees, tools flash in the sun, smoke drifts from a cooking fire. A child runs an errand between cabins. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing under their breath while working, not loudly, just enough to measure the hands. The whole plantation hums with tasks large and small, but now you can see a little more clearly which ones really hold it together. Not the planter's orders, not the house's polished furniture. It is held together by knowledgeable people making and mending, growing and healing, cooking and calculating, often without credit and always under threat. In 1835, Louisiana, black Americans survived sugar plantations not only through endurance, but through a vast reservoir of skill that turned everyday acts into forms of quiet power. Expertise with tools, gardens, herbs, fabric, wood, iron, food, and timing gave people ways to protect themselves and those around them. These abilities did not free them from slavery. Nothing so simple or generous existed here. But skill created room, however narrow, for agency, self-respect, and mutual care inside a world that tried to deny all three. On the plantation, knowledge was never neutral. In the right hands, it became a shield. Long before the sun rises fully, the plantation has already begun to breathe in that heavy Louisiana way. Warm and damp and close. Yet there is another atmosphere moving quietly through the quarters. One that does not come from weather, labour, or the river. It comes from belief. On a sugar plantation in 1835, faith is not a decorative thing perched neatly on a shelf. It is carried in the body, in the voice, in memory, in gestures so small they could pass unnoticed by anyone not listening carefully. It helps people endure what should not have to be endured. You step into the edge of a pine stand beyond the cabins where the ground is softer with needles and the air smells cleaner than the yard. Resin hangs in the breeze, sharp and comforting. Damp earth gives off a dark, cool scent. Somewhere overhead, branches murmur together. The world here feels a little muffled, as though the trees are holding sound for safekeeping. In places like this, away from the centre of a white supervision, enslaved people sometimes gathered to pray, sing, speak, and breathe more freely for a few precious moments. A mainstream historical fact is that enslaved black Americans across the South developed rich religious lives that blended evangelical Christianity with older African traditions, local customs, and communal forms of worship. In Louisiana, that spiritual world was shaped by the region's mix of African, French, Spanish, Caribbean, and Anglo-American influences. Religion could be taught by white ministers in controlled settings, but enslaved people also formed their own practices, meanings, and sacred spaces beyond planter oversight. You hear the sound before you fully see the group. A low voice begins a line, slow and steady. Others answer softly. The melody folds into the morning air, not grand and polished, but intimate and strong. A hymn, perhaps, or a spiritual shaped by memory and need. The singing does not rush. It rises from deep in the chest. It seems to move through the ground as much as through the air. Each note carries more than words. It carries fatigue, sorrow, longing, resolve, and the stubborn insistence that the soul remains more than the plantation says it is. Prayer in this world takes many forms. Sometimes it is spoken aloud in a circle. Sometimes it is whispered beside a sleeping child. Sometimes it is a line of scripture remembered imperfectly and loved all the more for surviving in fragments. Sometimes it is a moan, a hum, a hand laid on another shoulder. Formal church structures existed, yes, and planters often encouraged a controlled version of Christianity that emphasized obedience. But enslaved people heard those messages and transformed them. They listened for Moses, deliverance, justice, crossing over. God who sees, God who hears, God who knows the cry of the afflicted. The same Bible could be read as a chain or as a key, depending on who held it. You watch a woman bow her head and close her eyes while another speaks. Her hands are rough from labour, the knuckles dry, the nails worn close, yet the posture is gentle. Beside her, a man nods slowly as if following not only the prayer but an older rhythm beneath it. A child leans against an elder's leg, half sleepy, half curious. This gathering is not impressive by the standards of wealth or ceremony. No polished pews, no stained glass, no organ waiting in the corner with theatrical importance, and just people, breath, memory, and the need for meaning. That is enough. Historians still debate how clearly specific African religious elements can be traced within enslaved Christian practice in Louisiana, because the evidence is often indirect and filtered through hostile observers. Even so, scholars broadly agree that enslaved communities preserved and adapted many African-derived ways of understanding spirit, ritual, healing, protection, and the relationship between the living and the dead. The result was not a simple survival of one old religion unchanged. It was a creative spiritual world formed under extreme pressure. That pressure matters. Faith on a plantation is not abstract philosophy discussed over tea. It is practical. It is used to survive grief when family members are sold away. It is used to endure fear when illness spreads through the quarters. It is used to hold on to dignity after humiliation. It is used in childbirth, in burial, in sickness, in long nights, in small hopes. A prayer may ask for freedom. It may ask only for tomorrow. Sometimes tomorrow is the bolder request. The sensory life of worship is especially important. Sound carries first. Spirituals, lined hymns, hand claps, foot taps on hard ground, a voice cracking with emotion, a murmur of agreement. Then there is touch, hands joined, arms around shoulders, a cool cloth pressed to a forehead during a prayer for healing. There is smell too, pine resin, smoke on clothing, damp soil, a little sweat in the close air of a cabin gathering, candle tallow, boiled herbs nearby. Sacred life in the quarters is not separate from ordinary life. It is braided into it. You step back toward the cabins and find another expression of the same inner world. An elderly woman sits beside a hearth while stirring a pot of herbs and speaking quietly to a younger mother whose child has fever. The room is warm and dim. Shadows move over the wall as the fire flickers. The older woman crosses herself, then murmurs words that are partly prayer, partly healing instruction, and partly memory. In another home, the three might be kept separate. Here they live together quite comfortably. Faith and healing overlap because suffering rarely arrives in neat categories. One quirky detail from the spiritual lives of enslaved communities is the use of small protective objects carried close to the body or hidden in cabins. These might be roots, beads, coins, packets of herbs, bits of cloth, or written scraps folded and kept out of sight. Some were associated with Christian belief. Some echoed older African and Afro-Atlantic practices of spiritual protection. Some likely mixed many influences at once. To an outside observer, such objects could look simple or even superstitious. To the person carrying one, it could feel like a private shelter. Planters often feared gatherings they could not fully monitor, especially if music, movement, or preaching stirred strong emotion. White authorities knew that communal worship could strengthen ties among enslaved people, and strong ties were dangerous to a system that relied on isolation and fear. That suspicion was not entirely foolish from their perspective. Faith gave people language that slavery could not control completely. It offered stories in which tyrants fall, rivers part, and the oppressed are seen by heaven even when ignored on earth. Oppressive systems generally dislike being reminded that they are not eternal. You hear a man praying now in a low, steady voice. He does not speak like a formally trained preacher from a white church. He speaks like someone who has lived enough to know exactly what he needs to say. His words are simple: strength for the weary, mercy for the sick, protection for children, justice, somewhere, somehow. The others answer quietly, yes, amen. Lord, hear. Nothing flashy, no performance, just a room gathering itself around a plea. Not all spiritual expression is solemn. Joy has a place too, though it may appear gently rather than explosively in such exhausted lives. A song can swing with warmth. A prayer can make someone smile through tears. Testimony can include gratitude for a recovered child, for a safe birth, for a fish caught, for a patch of garden that held through too much rain. The sacred does not only hover over catastrophe, it slips into the small mercies that keep a week bearable. The cabin becomes a church for an hour. Then it becomes a home again without needing permission to change names. You also notice how faith teaches interpretation. The plantation tells one story about the world. It says power belongs to the owner, hierarchy is natural, suffering is deserved or inevitable, and obedience is virtue. Enslaved spirituality often told a different story. It taught that earthly masters were not final judges. It taught that human worth did not come from legal status. It taught that bondage was not proof of inferiority. It taught that memory mattered, that ancestors mattered, that deliverance was thinkable, and that tears were not wasted just because powerful people ignored them. For children, this spiritual world could be especially important. Stories from scripture, stories from elders, and prayers spoken over the young helped create a moral map wider than plantation law. A child learns that there is a God above the overseer. A child hears that suffering has meaning beyond the whip. A child hears names like Moses, Daniel, Mary, Joseph, Jesus, and learns that lowliness does not cancel importance. These lessons do not remove danger, but they give shape to courage. Women often carry enormous spiritual authority in these communities, even when formal leadership is more visible in male preaching. A woman may lead songs, nurse the sick, organize prayers, interpret dreams, comfort the grieving, and preserve family rights around birth and death. Her authority may not be announced from a pulpit, but it is felt deeply in daily life. A mother who prays over her children before dawn, a healer who speaks blessing over medicine, an elder who guides mourning after a death. These women hold communities together in ways no plantation ledger can measure. The matter of burial reveals this clearly. Death on sugar plantations was familiar and cruelly frequent. Yet even under such conditions, enslaved people sought to bury the dead with dignity. Prayer, song, simple markers, washing of the body, chosen clothing, and gathered remembrance all mattered. Historians are not always certain how particular rites were performed on every plantation, but evidence suggests that the dead were often honoured through rituals blending Christian hope and older communal traditions. Burial was a spiritual act and also a social one. It said this person belonged to us. This life will not disappear unmarked. Dreams and signs also move through this world. Someone dreams of water and wonders if change is coming. Someone reads meaning into a bird call at dawn, a candle sputtering oddly, a sudden hush before bad news. Modern people like to sort these things quickly into tidy boxes: religion, folklore, superstition, psychology. Plantation life was not tidy, and neither were the ways people understood it. Under intense uncertainty, attention to signs can become both comfort and survival skill. The world speaks in hints when formal power refuses to speak honestly at all. By evening, the spiritual atmosphere changes again. Day labourers warn everyone down, and the night air settles warm against the skin. Smoke drifts through the quarter. Fireflies pulse along the ditch edges. Somewhere a group begins another song, softer now, almost like rocking. The tune rises and falls with slow repetition. It feels designed to ease the breath. A baby sleeps through it. An older man closes his eyes and leans back against the wall. Someone fans the coals while listening. Sacred calm enters the room not as drama, but as a gradual softening. You can sense why this matters so much. Faith offers language for pain that might otherwise stay trapped inside the body. It offers company in loneliness and order in chaos. It allows people to imagine themselves beyond the categories slavery imposes. It can bless a meal, steady a birth, dignify a death, comfort a mother, strengthen a weary labourer, and teach a child to expect more from the universe than the plantation is willing to offer. For people denied political power, legal protection, and bodily autonomy, spiritual life becomes one of the few spaces where the self can still stand upright, and yet it is not merely inward. Belief can shape action. It can inspire patience. Yes, but also resistance, caution, solidarity, and a refusal to accept the moral logic of slavery. A person who truly believes in divine justice may endure more calmly, but may also become less willing to believe the master's story about who deserves power. That is one reason slaveholders tried so hard to supervise religion. They wanted the comfort of Christianity without the consequences of Exodus. In 1835, Louisiana, Black Americans survived the sugar plantation through a spiritual life that was tender, practical, communal, and quietly defiant. In pine groves, in cabins, beside sick beds, near cook fires, over infants, and around graves, they built sacred meaning out of sound, touch, memory, and hope. Faith did not remove hunger, heat, grief, or violence. It did something harder. It helped people remain human inside all of it. And sometimes that is the most radical thing of all. On a plantation, survival depends not only on what you can do, but on what you can read. You learn to read footsteps on packed dirt, the angle of a hat brim, the speed of a horse coming down the lane, the tone of a voice before the words even arrive. In Louisiana, sugar country, where labour is pushed hard and punishment can come quickly, watching becomes a life skill. Not the leisurely watching of a person on a porch with a cool drink and no pressing concerns. This is sharper than that. You watch because the body wants warning before trouble lands. The overseer appears at the edge of the yard just after sunrise, horse shifting beneath him, boots polished, face already carrying the stale irritation of a man who mistakes control for character. He surveys the field hands, the wagons, the tools, the cabins beyond. His gaze moves like a measuring rod, quick and cold. You can feel the atmosphere change around him. Conversation shortens, shoulders set, hands move a little faster. No one needs to announce his authority. It rides in with him and settles over the place like humidity. A mainstream historical fact is that overseers, drivers, and other plantation managers played a central role in the daily enforcement of slavery. On Louisiana sugar plantations, where the pace of labour could be especially severe, these men monitored work, distributed punishments, enforced schedules, and tried to maintain discipline during both field labour and the grinding season. Their presence shaped not only how work was done, but how enslaved people spoke, moved, and judged risk from hour to hour. You begin to understand that observation on the plantation flows in more than one direction. White authority watches enslaved workers for signs of slowness, resistance, disobedience, theft, illness, and fatigue. Enslaved workers watch authority for mood, weakness, distraction, vanity, and inconsistency. That second kind of watching is part of survival. You notice which overseer punishes lateness more than talking, which one blusters before he strikes, which one grows careless after drinking, which one is easier to approach in the presence of the planter's wife, which one can be delayed by a broken harness or a lame mule. None of this makes the system humane. It makes the people trapped inside it highly perceptive. The day in the fields begins with ordered motion. Hoes lift, cane knives flash, baskets shift from one set of hands to another, yet beneath the outward rhythm, minds are constantly calculating. How close is the overseer now? Where is the driver standing? Which row offers a momentary blind angle? Can a drink of water be taken now, or must it wait? Is that cough merely a cough, or is someone so sick they may collapse before noon? These calculations never fully stop. Plantation life trains the senses into vigilance. The sounds of authority matter. A horse snorting sharply near the head of the row, leather creaking, spurs brushing against a boot, a sudden shout across the field, the crack of a whip in the air, whether it lands or not. Even silence can be meaningful. A quiet overseer may be more dangerous than a noisy one because his temper arrives without warning. Enslaved people learn to hear the differences. Sound became information. Information became protection when possible. Historians continue to debate how much room enslaved workers had to negotiate daily discipline on particular plantations, since management styles varied and the archive is deeply uneven. Some overseers relied on constant brutality. Others mixed threats, surveillance, incentives, and the use of black drivers to maintain order. But across these variations, one truth remains steady. Enslaved people developed sophisticated strategies for navigating personalities because misjudging a mood could have painful consequences. You see this in the smallest interactions. A man answers a question with exactly enough words and no more. A woman keeps her face still when scolded, not because she agrees, but because expression itself can be treated as insolence. A teenager lowers his eyes at the right moment while still listening closely. Another worker asks for a tool replacement in a tone carefully balanced between urgency and deference. Every exchange is shaped by danger. The plantation demands performance, and people become skilled in giving it only as much as necessary. This does not mean everyone responds the same way. Some survive by seeming invisible, others by appearing cheerful, others by proving themselves useful in narrowly defined ways. Some rely on quick wit when conditions allow it. Some choose silence almost all the time. A few carry themselves with a reserve that authority reads as steadiness rather than defiance. These are tactical differences. None erase the violence behind them. One quirky detail from plantation accounts is how often overseers complained that enslaved people could appear obedient while quietly undermining expectations through delay, misunderstanding, selective compliance, or careful interpretation of orders. From the overseer's perspective, this was maddening. From the perspective of survival, it could be a vital art, a task done a little slower, a command followed literally rather than broadly, a missing tool found only after a proper search. Such acts could create breathing room without open confrontation. You move along the edge of a work gang and notice how information travels without seeming to travel. A glance flicks toward the road. Someone 2 rows over straightens at once. A warning about the driver's approach moves down the line in a muttered phrase that sounds like ordinary talk. A child sent with water carries news as well as the bucket. Plantation communities built quiet systems of awareness because official communication served power, not safety. The body feels different under scrutiny. Muscles tighten, shoulders lift, the neck stiffens. Even the skin seems more alert, as if it can feel eyes resting on it. Sweat runs down the spine, partly from heat, partly from the strain of being watched. In the cane rows, leaves brush the arms with dry little cuts. In the yard, dust sticks to damp ankles. In the mill, furnace heat makes every movement feel exposed. Surveillance is physical. It enters the nerves. Punishment hovers in the background of all this, sometimes visible, sometimes only anticipated. A reprimand, extra labour, confinement, the whip, sale threats, family separation used as terror. Not every overseer punishes in the same way or at the same frequency, but the possibility itself shapes behaviour. Enslaved people had to think not only about what was right or needed, but about what might provoke retaliation. Moral life under slavery was constantly pressed through the filter of risk. Women faced especially layered forms of scrutiny. They were watched for field performance, household obedience, sexual vulnerability, child care, and behaviour judged against arbitrary standards of deference. A woman might need to manage an overseer's temper, a mistress's suspicion, and the needs of her own family all in the same day. That is not simply labour. It is a continuous mental negotiation with power. The toll of it must have been immense, even when documents fail to say so plainly. Children learned early how to watch as well. A boy running an errand can tell from a face whether now is a dangerous time to linger. A girl carrying food to the field notices which adults are tense and which are momentarily at ease. Young people absorb the rules not because anyone wishes them to, but because the plantation teaches harshly. Childhood becomes an education in reading authority before one can fully name it. There is also the complicated role of black drivers, men placed in positions between enslaved labourers and white management. Some enforced discipline harshly under pressure, or for personal survival. Others tried quietly to shield workers where they could, easing pace, passing warnings, or softening orders. Historians resist simple judgments here because the position itself was fraught. A driver held a little delegated authority but remained enslaved and vulnerable. Plantation systems loved such arrangements because they spread tension sideways among the oppressed. You can sense the emotional wear in these interactions. Constant caution drains a person. To measure every word, guard every look, and anticipate another's temper from dawn to dark is exhausting in a way that does not show up neatly in the ledger. Yet people still found room for inner life. That may be one of the most remarkable things. Behind the controlled face, thoughts remained active. Anger survived. Humour survived. Judgment survived. Love survived. The overseer could command a posture. He could not fully command what that posture concealed. A woman in the yard pauses while carrying a basket and seems to adjust the cloth at her head. In that tiny pause, she murmurs a warning to another woman about the mistress coming from the house. The second woman alters course at once, taking a different path that keeps her from a likely scolding over some imagined slight. A small thing, perhaps. But plantation life is made of small things with large consequences. The smells of the day deepen as the hours pass: horse sweat, hot leather, cane juice souring on the mill floor, mud warming in the sun, smoke drifting from a distant cook fire. None of it is neutral. Smell can mark where authority is before you see it. Tobacco on an overseer's coat, whiskey on a supervisor's breath, medicinal camphor in a cabin where someone is ill and therefore vulnerable. The senses gather clues constantly. Historians still argue over the degree to which enslaved people could exploit rivalries among white authorities, but there is evidence that many recognize tensions between planter and overseer, mistress and overseer, manager and skilled worker. Those tensions sometimes opened narrow spaces. A complaint might be timed when one authority wished to embarrass another. A request might be made to the softer party in a household. A harsh order might be slowed by appealing to the owner's concern for expensive machinery or valuable stock. This was not justice. It was navigation. Humour, once again, works in shadows. Not broad mockery where it can be punished, but subtle private irony shared with trusted company. A raised eyebrow when the overseer boasts beyond his understanding. A dry remark once he's out of earshot. A mimicry of his stiff posture performed for laughter in the quarters at night. Mockery does not overthrow power, but it punctures its claim to grandeur. Sometimes that is enough to keep dignity alive for another day. You begin to notice how people preserve fragments of control through pace. Not open refusal, that can be deadly, but a measured distribution of effort, a saving of strength when eyes turn elsewhere, a careful spacing of motions to endure the full day. The overseer wants visible output. The worker wants survival through the week, the month, the season. These goals are not the same, and every labouring body knows it. Late afternoon brings a different mood. Authority often grows impatient as daylight shrinks. If quotas are unmet or tempers fray, danger can rise. Workers know this and read the signs. A horse turned sharply, a shout too quick, a whip carried in hand rather than at the saddle. People adjust without speaking much. They tighten rows. They finish tasks cleanly. They avoid drawing notice. The whole field seems to breathe a little shallower until the worst of the hour passes. Then evening comes, and with it a slight loosening. Not freedom, never that, but the angle of scrutiny changes. Supervisors withdraw, or at least their gaze no longer falls so directly on every movement. Faces soften, backs unbend a little. Speech returns in fuller sentences. It is striking how visible relief becomes when fear steps half a pace away. What this world teaches above all is that survival under surveillance requires intellect as much as endurance. You learn to interpret character, weather, routine, sound, and timing. You learn what to reveal and what to hide. You learn how to protect others through warning, how to avoid danger through reading moods, how to preserve a private self while performing a public one. None of that appears in the planter's boasts about discipline. Yet it is one of the great unrecorded achievements of the enslaved. In 1835, Louisiana Black Americans survived sugar plantations partly by becoming expert observers in a society built on scrutiny. They watched the overseer's posture, the driver's tone, the planter's habits, and the shifting emotional weather of the yard and field. They passed information quietly, adjusted behavior strategically, and used perception as a shield where no legal protection existed. Under constant watch, they learned to watch back. And in that act of careful seeing, they found one more way to endure. Not every corner of plantation life is claimed in the same way. The fields are ruled loudly, the mill is ruled by heat and haste, the yard belongs to inspection, commands, and counting. But there are narrower places, less grand and less visible, where survival takes on a different texture. You find it in the garden patch behind a cabin, in a basket carried to a Sunday market, in a fishing line dropped quietly at dusk, in a chicken coop patched from scraps. These are not spaces of freedom in any full sense. Still, they offer something precious on a sugar plantation, a little choice, a little exchange, a little control over what enters the body and what stays in the hand. The morning air near the quarters smells different from the larger plantation. Here you catch damp soil, crushed mint underfoot, chicken feathers, wood smoke, and the green scent of bean vines climbing rough stakes. A woman bends over a small garden with a hoe worn smooth at the handle. The plot is modest, but it is carefully kept. Sweet potatoes push under the earth. Greens gather in low rows. A few onions stand in a corner beside herbs. At the edge, there may be peppers, squash, or flowers planted simply because the eye also needs feeding. The soil is dark and crumbly. The leaves shine with dew. This patch is work, certainly, but it is work shaped by the person tending it. A mainstream historical fact is that many enslaved people across the South cultivated provision grounds or small garden plots when allowed, raising vegetables and sometimes livestock to supplement plantation rations. In Louisiana, these plots could be vital for survival, especially where sugar labour was intense and official food allowances were poor. Gardens, fishing, hunting, and local trade helped many enslaved families secure extra nourishment, variety, and a fragile measure of independence within a system designed to deny both. You can see at once why gardens mattered. Plantation rations were often monotonous and insufficient for people doing hard physical labour. Cornmeal and pork might keep a body from immediate collapse, but they did not create health, comfort, or much pleasure. A garden could add beans, greens, sweet potatoes, squash, herbs, and other crops that changed what a family could cook and how strong they might remain through the season. Extra eggs from chickens, a fish pulled from a bayou, or a rabbit trapped beyond the fence could mean the difference between constant hunger and a meal with some dignity in it. The touch of garden work is different from cane labour. The soil crumbles under the fingers. Leaves brush the wrist softly instead of slicing like cane. A hoe in this setting feels purposeful rather than punitive. You loosen weeds, pat down earth, pinch off damaged growth, and tie vines where they should climb. The labour is still real, especially after a day already spent in the plantation service, but it gives something back. That exchange matters. To tend land and later eat from it is a kind of reply to a world built on theft. Around these little plots, knowledge accumulates quietly. People know which plants survive wet spells, which insects ruin beans, which fence corner gets the longest light, which moon phase some prefer for planting, whether from inherited tradition, practical observation, or both. Children learn by carrying water, pulling weeds, gathering greens, and listening. An elder shows how deep to set a sweet potato slip. A mother crushes mint between her fingers and tells a child to smell it well. A boy is told not to yank at the bean roots, because patience feeds people better than impatience. Lessons move through the garden without needing a schoolroom. Historians still debate how widespread and secure these provision grounds were on the individual Louisiana sugar plantations, because owners differed and records are uneven. Some planters encouraged gardens because they reduced feeding costs. Others restricted them more tightly. Some allowed market activity. Others tried to suppress it. Yet the evidence is clear that many enslaved people found ways to grow, gather, and trade food and goods whenever an opening appeared. Those openings were never guaranteed. That made them all the more valuable. Market day changes the atmosphere entirely. You walk near a local road or town edge and the sounds shift from plantation order to clustered exchange. Wheels creak, chickens cluck from baskets, people call prices, greet one another, compare produce, weigh fish, and inspect cloth or tools. The smell is lively and mixed. Fresh vegetables, smoke-cured meat, mud on boots, river air, soap, molasses, maybe a little coffee nearby if fortune is smiling on someone. For enslaved people who could participate, these markets offered more than goods. They offered news, movement, and contact beyond the plantation boundary. A woman arrives carrying greens, eggs, and a little basket of herbs tied neatly with string. Her dress is plain, her face composed, but her eyes miss nothing. She knows what things are worth. She knows who pays fairly, who haggles too long, who might exchange food for thread, who has gossip from another parish, who knows whether the river road is crowded with traders this week. Trade requires social skill as much as produce. You must judge value, read character, and protect yourself from cheating where possible. It is commerce in miniature, but no less intelligent for its size. One quirky detail from plantation economies is how many small items pass through these informal exchanges. A few eggs might bring thread, pins, tobacco, or a scrap of cloth. A bunch of onions could be traded for a fish hook. Herbs might be exchanged for a little coffee, salt, or a useful household item. Nothing is trivial when resources are scarce. A needle can preserve clothing, salt can preserve food, a ribbon can restore beauty to a hard week. Small things carry surprising weight. The market also carries information. News travels beside produce. Someone has heard of sickness on a neighbouring place. Someone knows which overseer was dismissed for drunkenness. Someone says the river is high. Someone else heard of a person sold south from another parish. Stories move between baskets and wagons, half-whispered, half-tested for truth. In a world where official channels serve power, informal exchange becomes a lifeline. Food feeds the body, information feeds judgment. Fishing opens another narrow lane of survival. At dusk or before sunrise, a person might work a line near a bayou, ditch, pond, or river edge if time and conditions allow. The smell here is cool and muddy, with reeds, water, and the faint rot of wet leaves. Frogs plop into the shallows. Insects skim the surface. A line trembles in the hand. Even a small catch can matter. Catfish, perch, or other local fish could stretch a pot for several people. For some, fishing also offered a few moments of relative stillness, a pause from the plantation's constant commands. The silence of waiting beside water has its own kind of comfort. Hunting, trapping, and gathering added still more to this hidden economy where possible. A rabbit from a snare, wild berries when in season, nuts gathered under trees, mushrooms only if one knew them well enough not to make supper unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Such activities required intimate environmental knowledge and often a bit of secrecy. The plantation did not always welcome enslaved people using time or land beyond official labour, yet need teachers' initiative. An initiative often slipped through the cracks of control. You notice how women's economic work is especially easy to overlook if you are not paying attention. They grow food, preserve it, cook it, trade it, budget it, and make constant decisions about what can be spared and what must be kept. A woman deciding whether to sell eggs or save them for the household is making an economic calculation under pressure. A woman trading herbs for cloth is investing in future clothing repair. A woman drying beans or saving seed is planning beyond the day. These choices build stability one handful at a time. Livestock, even on the smallest scale, can matter enormously. A few chickens scratching behind the cabins provide eggs, meat, feathers, and something like movable wealth, a pig, if a family or group can manage one, becomes even more valuable, though more difficult to feed and protect. Animals require attention, scraps, shelter, and luck. They also require defense from theft, weather, and the plantation's shifting rules. Still, where people could keep them, such animals offered rare practical leverage. There is also a psychological difference in these spaces. In the field, your labour is counted for someone else. In the garden or at market, your effort can sometimes be felt more directly in the result. A row of greens responds to your hand. A chicken egg gathered warm from the nest belongs to an actual decision. A fish traded for salt becomes supper because you made it so. That sense of cause and effect may sound small, but under slavery it could be deeply sustaining. It restored a little connection between work and personal benefit. A connection the plantation otherwise worked hard to sever. Children move through this world too. A girl carries herbs in a basket and learns which ones fetch interest. A boy minds chickens and learns their habits. Another child is sent with produce and warned carefully about whom to trust and how much to say. Economic life becomes another school of attention, not abstract arithmetic on a slate, but counting eggs, dividing beans, estimating worth, and knowing when to walk away from a bad exchange. These are sharp lessons. The atmosphere around a successful trade can feel almost festive in a quiet way. A woman returns with a bit of coffee, some thread, and perhaps a precious scrap of cloth. Someone unwraps the bundle and everyone leans in to see. The smell of coffee, faint though it is, changes the whole room for a moment. A child touches the fabric edge with careful fingers. Need has not disappeared, but a little gain alters the spirit. It says the world did not take everything today. Historians continue to discuss how much money or goods enslaved people could accumulate through these channels, because experiences varied enormously and ownership remained legally unstable. A person might save a little cash, clothing, tools, or household goods over time, yet all of it remained vulnerable to seizure, sale, or theft. Still, the fact that people tried to build something under such conditions reveals how deeply the desire for self-provision and self-direction persisted. Human beings do not stop wanting a margin of control simply because the law says they should. You see that desire in the careful way a basket is packed, in the neat rows of a garden, in the knot tied around a saved coin, in the seed wrapped for next season, in the hidden place where thread and needles are kept dry. Order itself becomes an act of hope. Planning becomes a quiet refusal to live only from one command to the next. Even beauty finds its way into these practical spaces. A border of flowers near collards, a basket woven neatly when rougher work would do, a head wrap chosen with care for market, a jar polished clean on a shelf. Beauty is not separate from survival. It can steady the heart, announce self-respect, and remind a person that usefulness is not the only value in life. As evening settles, the garden darkens into silhouettes and the market road empties. Smoke rises from the quarters. Pots begin to simmer. Somewhere a chicken fusses before settling onto its perch. The ground holds the day's warmth, and the smell of damp leaves drifts in from the ditch. Hands that hoed, planted, traded, counted, carried, and cleaned finally slow for a moment. The gains may be small, a few greens, a bit of salt, some thread, a handful of fish, yet in plantation life, small gains can hold immense meaning. In 1835, Louisiana, Black Americans survived sugar plantations partly through these narrow economic worlds at the edges of formal control. Gardens, fishing, poultry, gathering, and market exchange provided food, goods, information, and a fragile sense of self-direction. These were not full freedoms. They existed under threat, exhaustion, and constant uncertainty. But within those constraints, people built practical systems of support and exchange that helped sustain body, household, and spirit in the rows of beans, in the clink of eggs in a basket, in the low murmur of bargaining at market. Survival took the shape of small freedoms made useful. Hope on a plantation rarely arrives dressed in grand language. It moves more carefully than that. It comes as rumour, as a glance, as a lowered voice near a fence line, as a name spoken only once, as a story carried by someone who's been farther down the river than most. On a Louisiana sugar plantation in 1835, open defiance is dangerous, but resistance still lives in the air. Not always as rebellion in the dramatic sense. Often it appears in smaller, riskier, quieter forms that ask the same human question beneath them all. Must this be forever? You feel that question most sharply at dusk, when the day's official labour loosens just enough for talk to drift. The sky over the Mississippi turns from pale gold to copper, then to a deeper blue that swallows the road and softens the outlines of the cane. Smoke rises from the quarters and flattens under the humid evening air. Frogs begin again in the ditches. Insects whir in the grass. Somewhere a wagon creaks late toward the works. In that hour between labour and sleep, the plantation becomes a place of murmurs. A mainstream historical fact is that enslaved people in the antebellum South resisted slavery in many ways, not only through open revolt but through flight, sabotage, concealment, work slowdowns, theft of provisions, preservation of family ties, and the sharing of forbidden information. In Louisiana, memories of earlier uprisings remained powerful, especially the great 1811 German Coast Revolt, when hundreds of enslaved people marched against plantations near the Mississippi before the rebellion was violently crushed. By 1835, that event still haunted white planters and still lingered in black memory as proof that resistance could take collective form. The memory of revolt matters. Even when no revolt is happening tonight, it changes how stories sound. A whisper about men once marching with cane knives and drums does not need many details to stir the mind. A child overhears a name and asks no question, but remembers it. An elder pauses before speaking, not from uncertainty, but from caution learned the hard way. The plantation tries to control memory because memory gives shape to possibility. You stand near a cabin doorway where two men are speaking in low voices while one pares a stick with a knife. His hands move steadily, shaving curls of wood into the dust. The other keeps his eyes outward toward the yard. They are not performing secrecy in an obvious way. That would attract attention. They are simply careful. The subject could be almost anything. A sail downriver, a boatman who passed news, a patrol on the road, a man on a neighbouring plantation who disappeared last month and was never found again. On a plantation, the line between ordinary talk and dangerous talk can be very thin. Historians still debate how often organised resistance plans advance beyond rumour on individual plantations. Because secrecy was essential, and surviving records are usually written by frightened slaveholders or authorities after the fact. But there is broad agreement that rumours themselves were important. They spread information, tested trust, carried emotional force, and kept alive the idea that slavery was not beyond challenge. Even talk that led nowhere practical could sustain a sense that the system was neither natural nor uncontested. Rumour travels in recognisable pathways. Boatmen carry it along the river, hired out workers bring it back from town. Market exchanges pass it between parishes. House servants overhear pieces of conversation and translate them into something useful. Drivers notice unusual patrols or anxious behaviour among whites. News from New Orleans, from upriver, from neighbouring estates, from a jail, from a church gathering, from a funeral. All of it enters the plantation in fragments. No one person has the full picture. People assemble meaning from pieces. The river itself feeds this world of possibility. The Mississippi is not merely scenery here. It is movement, commerce, communication, an imagined escape all at once. Barges slide past carrying sugar, cotton, timber, and people. Steamboats churn up river and down, loud and smoky against the water. Free black sailors, deckhands, teamsters, and labourers move through river spaces where plantation lines blur slightly. Not enough to make safety easy. Enough to make contact possible. A message, a warning, a rumour, a route, a name of someone who might help. Rivers gather secrets because they gather people. The smell near the levee is heavy and mineral, with mud, wet wood, fish, and the rank sweetness of river weeds. Night air there feels cooler for a moment against the skin. Lantern light swings on a passing craft and throws brief gold across dark water. You can understand why the river tempted the imagination. It leads somewhere else, not necessarily to freedom, certainly not reliably, but away. On a plantation, away can become a powerful word. Running away was one of the clearest forms of resistance, though also among the most perilous. Some fled for a few days to escape punishment or rest their bodies. Others aimed for maroon communities, swamps, cities, or distant states. Louisiana's geography offered both shelter and danger. Bayous, cypress swamps, and wooded edges could hide a person. They could also starve, mislead, or expose them. Dogs, patrols, advertisements, informers, and unfamiliar terrain made long-term escape brutally difficult. Yet people kept trying, which tells you everything you need to know about plantation life. One quirky detail from runaway notices is how revealing they can be about the skills of the people being hunted. Ads often described men and women as speaking several languages, playing fiddle, working as carpenters, cooking well, forging passes, steering boats, or having kin on other plantations. Slaveholders wrote these details to recover human property. What they also did, unintentionally, was document the breadth of enslaved intelligence, mobility, and connection. The person fleeing often knew the world much better than the owner wished to admit. Resistance also took forms that did not involve flight. Tools broke at suspicious moments. Animals wandered where fencing ought to have held them. Fires started under ambiguous circumstances. Food or clothing found its way into the hands of those who needed it without passing through official permission. A task was misunderstood, A pace slackened. A message failed to arrive on time. These acts existed on a spectrum from survival to sabotage. The line between the two could be impossible to draw cleanly, especially from the inside. If a hungry child eats stolen corn, is that theft or care? The plantation says one thing. Human judgment says another. You notice how resistance depends on trust, and trust is costly. To share a rumour of escape or revolt is to place yourself in another person's hands. Not everyone can be trusted. Fear, exhaustion, coercion, jealousy, or hope of favour can all produce betrayal. That uncertainty shapes the tone of every dangerous conversation. People test one another slowly. A hint before a statement, a question before a fact, a name withheld until another name is offered. Trust grows like a cautious plant in poor soil. Women participate in these networks in ways the white record often understates. A woman moving between kitchen, yard, and quarters may hear more than a field hand can. A washerwoman picks up talk from the big house. A mother carries messages under the cover of family errands. A market seller gathers news while seeming occupied only with eggs or greens. Women also hide people, food, and objects. They preserve secrecy within the rhythms of ordinary work. Resistance does not only wear boots and run at night. Sometimes it stirs a pot with one hand and protects a plan with the other. Children, too, live near the edges of these hidden worlds. Adults may try to shield them, but children hear things. They notice fear in a face, urgency in a whisper, excitement when a stranger's name is spoken softly. Some carry messages because they attract less suspicion. Some simply absorb the knowledge that adults live by two vocabularies, one for power and one for themselves. That lesson alone is a political education. The plantation's atmosphere changes when whites sense trouble. Patrols increase. Questions sharpen. Doors are watched more closely. Lanterns burn later. Overseers ride with extra tension in the shoulders. Dogs are mentioned more often than anyone would like. The quarters respond by becoming outwardly calm. Conversations shorten in the open. Faces reveal less. This is one of the great paradoxes of oppressed communities. The more danger rises, the quieter the surface may become. Historians continue to argue over how much collective resistance in the sugar parishes was driven by direct memory of Saint-Domingue and the Haitian Revolution. But the influence of Atlantic events on Louisiana cannot be dismissed. Refugees, soldiers, sailors, migrants, and traders carried stories across languages and borders. White Louisianans certainly feared such influence, which is often a sign that influence existed. For enslaved black people, the knowledge that slavery had been overthrown elsewhere mattered enormously, even if details arrived distorted or incomplete. It proved that the world could change in ways masters said were impossible. That kind of knowledge does not guarantee action. Sometimes it intensifies frustration. Sometimes it inspires planning. Sometimes it simply keeps despair from hardening into acceptance. A man hearing of Haiti may never leave his parish, yet the idea enters him and alters the scale of what he believes humans can do. Ideas have long legs, even when the people carrying them are forced to stand still. Night deepens. The cabins glow faintly through cracks in the boards. Crickets scrape their endless music. Somewhere a child is hushed back to sleep. Somewhere else, two adults continue a conversation so low it is nearly below hearing. A scrap of paper changes hands. Perhaps a pass. Perhaps a list of names. Perhaps nothing so dramatic at all. A bundle is tucked into a hiding place. A little extra food is set aside. A route is described not by map, but by tree, ditch, ferry, bend, church, and sound. Turn where the cypress leans. Wait until moonset. Avoid the barking dogs near the mill road. Knowledge takes a practical form when danger is real. There is also interior resistance, quieter but no less serious. To refuse in your own mind the categories slavery imposes. To reject the idea that punishment proves guilt or that ownership proves superiority. To remember a father's name, a mother's story, a place of birth, a language fragment, a prayer, a skill. To teach a child to carry pride without displaying it recklessly. Such acts do not topple plantations by themselves. But no collective resistance begins without an inward refusal to believe the master's fiction. Humour sometimes joins this inward resistance. A private joke about the planter's ignorance of the very crop that enriches him. A mocking imitation of an overseer safely away from his ears. Laughter shared after a close call. This is not trivial. Tyranny likes solemnity around itself. Ridicule steals some of its borrowed grandeur. At the same time, not every rumour leads to courage. Some produce fear, some are false, some lure desperate people into traps. People knew this too. Wisdom on the plantation included skepticism. Who said it? Where did they hear it? Why are patrols quiet tonight? Why is that man asking too many questions? Survival required not only hope, but the discipline to examine hope before following it into darkness. The emotional texture of this world is complicated. You sense longing, anger, caution, excitement, sorrow, and fatigue all mixed together. A person may dream of escape and still choose not to risk children. Another may long for rebellion and yet fear the slaughter that could follow. Another may resist only in small daily ways because those are the only ways available. It is important to see this clearly. Resistance is not one posture. It is many responses to unbearable circumstances. As midnight nears, the plantation appears still from a distance. The great house is dark except for one or two windows. The cane fields are black shapes under the sky. The river moves unseen but audible, broad and slow. Yet beneath that stillness to thrill, thought continues. Plans are weighed, news is remembered, routes are imagined, names are protected. The system sleeps more easily than the people it enslaves. In 1835, Louisiana, Black Americans survived sugar plantations partly by keeping alive a world of dangerous hope. Through rumour, memory, sabotage, secrecy, flight, and the simple refusal to accept slavery as natural, they resisted in ways large and small. Some acts were public enough to terrify planters. Many more stayed hidden in cabins, market roads, river talk, and the guarded spaces between trusted people. The plantation demanded obedience. The people within it kept generating alternatives, sometimes in action, sometimes in thought, always at risk. That steady creation of possibility was itself a form of survival. By now, the plantation landscape feels almost too familiar. The cane stands thick and tall in the damp Louisiana air. The roads are grooved by wagon wheels and hooves. Smoke rises from the boiling works, drifts over the yard, and settles into clothes, hair, and lungs. The Mississippi moves past it all with the heavy confidence of a river that has seen too much and kept flowing anyway. In 1835, this world is built to extract sweetness from the land and labour from black bodies. Yet what it never fully learns how to control is the stubborn, daily, almost unglamorous resilience of the people forced to endure it. Survival on a sugar plantation is not one dramatic act. It is not a single escape, a single speech, or a single moment of triumph that neatly redeems all the cruelty. It is slower than that, more repetitive, more human. It lives in the body waking before dawn and standing up anyway. It lives in the hand that lifts a hoe, steadies a kettle, mends a shirt, braids a child's hair, plants a row of greens, wraps a wound, keeps a memory alive. It lives in the mind that calculates, adapts, watches, and refuses to surrender its inner measure of self. Some of the grandest truths in history are made from such small motions. A mainstream historical fact remains at the centre of this story. Louisiana sugar plantations in the early 19th century were among the harshest labour regimes in the United States, demanding grueling fieldwork, dangerous industrial processing, and relentless seasonal urgency from enslaved black workers. Mortality could be high, labour discipline severe, and family life constantly threatened by sale, punishment, and exhaustion. Yet despite these conditions, enslaved people formed enduring communities, preserved cultural knowledge, sustained families, created spiritual meaning, and built material strategies for survival that slavery itself depended upon while trying to deny them recognition. You walk again through the quarters in the soft hour when smoke rises from breakfast fires and the ground still holds the coolness of night. The cabins are weathered, patched, crowded, and fragile. Even so, they hold warmth. A pot begins to simmer. A woman shakes out a blanket. A child rubs sleep from the eyes. Someone steps outside and tilts a face toward the morning air for one quiet second before work begins. You can smell ash, cornmeal, damp earth, and that faint sweetness of cane that seems to cling to every surface here. Life gathers itself once more. What becomes clear in this place is that endurance has many textures. Sometimes it is loud enough to be seen in open resistance. More often it is soft and persistent. It is the decision to teach a child names, skills, stories, and manners that slavery would rather erase. It is the care given to elders whose knowledge still guides the living. It is the choice to save seed for another planting, though tomorrow is never promised. It is the effort to keep clothes mended, cabins swept, meals seasoned, songs remembered, and prayers spoken. These things may look ordinary from the outside. Under slavery, ordinary care becomes extraordinary resolve. Historians still argue over how best to describe survival under such severe oppression, because there is always a risk of making endurance sound too smooth or too noble. Survival was not graceful every day. People were exhausted, frightened, sick, angry, grieving, and sometimes broken in visible and invisible ways. Community could be strong, but it was also strained by scarcity, sale, coercion, and grief. Not every household stayed intact. Not every person found comfort in faith. Not every act of adaptation felt empowering. This uncertainty matters. To survive is not to escape damage. It is to continue living and making meaning within damage that should never have been inflicted. The plantation yard begins to stir more fully now. Metal knocks against metal. A mule stamps and flicks its ears. The low murmur of voices moves through the morning. You notice how every task on the plantation carries the imprint of black knowledge. Someone sharpened the blade. Someone repaired the barrel. Someone judged the fire correctly last night. Someone planted the greens by the cabin wall. Someone noticed which child was feverish. Someone knew which ditch would flood. Someone carried news from the road. The official story of the plantation credits ownership. The real story credits labour, skill, and communal intelligence. One quirky detail that says a great deal is the importance of tiny personal possessions in a world built on deprivation. A blue bead sewn into cloth, a smooth coin hidden in a pouch, a carved comb, a shell on a shelf, a ribbon folded carefully away. Such objects could steady memory, express beauty, or simply remind a person that not everything intimate had been taken. The planter saw fields, kettles, acreage, and yield. The people in the quarters understood the emotional economy of a single cherished thing. Resilience here is deeply social. A person may endure alone for a little while, but plantation life is survived most reliably through connection. A shared warning in the field, a borrowed cup of meal, a grandmother's remedy for cough, a friend who keeps watch while another steals a few moments of rest, a husband who comes back from exhausting work and still repairs a roof leak before rain, a mother who saves the best bite of food for a child, a neighbour who sits awake beside the sick. These gestures create a living net beneath people who would otherwise be left to fall through the cracks of slavery's design. You move toward the edge of a garden patch and the atmosphere shifts again. Dew rests on leaves. The soil smells rich and cool. A few chickens scratch near the fence. Mint releases its scent when touched. Here, resilience looks green. It looks like beans climbing where they were guided. It looks like sweet potatoes swelling unseen under the earth. It looks like labour that answers to hunger directly instead of answering only to profit. Gardens did not end the plantation's power, but they gave families food, planning, and a small relationship to the land not entirely dictated by the owner's ledger. The body remembers this world through sensation. The sting of cane leaves against skin. The damp press of Louisiana heat. The ache of shoulders after lifting and cutting. The burn of a furnace room. The relief of cool water on cracked hands. The scratch of rough cloth. The softness of a child asleep against the chest. The weight of evening air after a long day. To think about survival only as an idea would miss too much. Survival is physical. It is a matter of feet, lungs, stomach, hands, scars, and tired muscles. Resilience lives in flesh. Women's resilience carries particular weight in this setting. They labour in fields, gardens, kitchens, cabins, sick rooms, birthing spaces and markets. They feed others while hungry themselves. They comfort children while grieving. They preserve kinship under the constant threat of separation. They sow, plan, nurse, barter, remember, and pray. Much of this labour goes uncounted in the plantation economy, which is one of many reasons the plantation economy never truly understood the sources of its own continuity. It depended on women's hidden work while pretending only cane and capital mattered. Men's endurance also takes many forms beyond the stereotypes white records preferred. A man may labour with astonishing force in the field or mill, yes, but he may also be valued as a healer, singer, carpenter, father, fisherman, storyteller, or careful keeper of community memory. Strength is present, but so are tenderness, craft, caution, and emotional steadiness. Plantation records often flatten black manhood into labour units or threats. Daily life reveals a fuller truth. Children represent a quieter kind of victory. That may sound strange in a place where childhood was so burdened, but it is true. To raise children at all under slavery required immense labour and hope. To feed them, teach them, comfort them, and help them develop personality inside a world trying to shape them into property was a profound act of resistance. A child learning a song, a prayer, a garden skill, a joke, a family name, or a way of carrying the self with dignity becomes living evidence that the plantation cannot fully own the future it intends to dominate. Spiritual life remains part of this endurance. Not because faith solved suffering, but because it offered language, rhythm, and sacred value in a place designed to reduce people to units of labour. Prayer could calm panic, song could steady breath, burial rituals could restore dignity. Sacred stories could remind people that power on earth was not ultimate. Even doubt had a place. Some prayed with certainty. Some prayed because they had nowhere else to put their sorrow. Both forms mattered. The river road beyond the plantation hints at a larger world. Traders pass, boatmen carry stories, news drifts in from New Orleans, upriver towns, market stalls, docks, and neighbouring estates. Louisiana is not sealed off from the wider Atlantic world, and the enslaved know that. They know of free black communities, of sailors, of uprisings, of territories where laws differ, of rumours that refuse to die. The knowledge that other realities exist may not bring immediate freedom, but it alters the mind. It keeps the plantation from becoming the only imaginable universe. Historians continue to explore how cultural memory survived under such pressure, especially in a place as mixed as Louisiana, where African, Creole, Caribbean, French, Spanish, and Anglo influences met under violent conditions. What seems certain is that memory did survive, though not always in neat or easily traceable forms. It survived in cooking methods, healing practices, rhythms, stories, burial customs, work songs, child rearing, language fragments, spiritual beliefs, and ways of reading land and season. Culture under slavery was not static preservation in a glass case. It was adaptation with roots. There is also the resilience of humour, which deserves more respect than it usually gets. On a plantation, humour can puncture fear for a moment. It can mock pretension. It can make room for breathing where pressure is otherwise constant. Dry jokes in the quarters, sly mimicry beyond an overseer's hearing, laughter over a mule's bad temper or a planter's ignorance of his own crop. These things matter. Laughter under oppression is not denial. It is proof that the oppressor has failed to colonize every part of the spirit. As the day leans toward evening, the plantation begins to glow in a softer light. The cane catches gold along its edges. Smoke lifts from the cabins in thin threads. The air is warm, almost velvety now, though still heavy. Somewhere a pot lid rattles. Somewhere a baby cries, then quiets. somewhere a hymn begins so softly it could be mistaken for wind. The atmosphere changes from command to care, from public labour to private repair. This transition may happen every day, yet it never becomes trivial. Each evening asks the same question: how will people gather themselves again? Each evening answers: together, imperfectly, patiently. Resilience does not mean slavery failed to wound. It wounded constantly. Bodies wore down. Loved ones were sold away. Illness took hold. Punishment scarred skin and mind. The future remained uncertain and often cruel. It is important not to polish survival into something falsely triumphant. The truth is more complicated and more honourable. Black Americans on Louisiana sugar plantations survived through methods shaped by necessity, intelligence, attachment, memory, and repeated care. They built lives under conditions meant to prevent life from feeling fully human. That achievement should not be romanticized, but it should be recognized with seriousness. Recognition also means refusing the old plantation myth that wealth came from visionary owners and productive land alone. Land does not organize itself. Sugar does not boil itself. Barrels do not mend themselves. Children do not raise themselves. Communities do not sustain themselves without enormous labor. The wealth of Louisiana sugar was generated by enslaved black people whose expertise reached from the furrow to the furnace, from the cradle to the grave, from the garden patch to the river landing. Their survival was not a footnote to the system. It was the hidden condition of the system's existence. Now the night settles more completely. The frogs call from the ditches in patient rhythm. Crickets take over the pauses between human sounds. Firelight flickers through cabin cracks. The smell of wood smoke and supper hangs low across the quarters. Inside, people sit close after another day drawn from them by force. A shirt is patched. A hand is held. A child is kissed on the forehead. A prayer is whispered. Someone leans back, closes tired eyes, and listens to the night. In such moments, resilience is not an abstract virtue. It is the simple, astonishing fact that life still gathers, still warms itself, still reaches for meaning, and that may be the deepest truth of all. Slavery tried to make human beings into instruments. The people on these plantations kept proving, day after day, that they were more than anything the system named them. They remained parents, lovers, healers, gardeners, singers, workers, thinkers, mourners, jokers, believers, skeptics, planners, and carriers of memory. They remained fully human in a place organized around denying that humanity. Their survival was not passive, it was active, skilled, communal, and relentless in its quiet forms. It lived in every meal stretched, every danger read, every child taught, every song remembered, every bruise tended, every hope guarded, every dawn met once more. The night grows gentler now. The plantation recedes into shadow, though not into innocence. The cane fields darken into soft lines under the sky. The river moves beyond sight, broad and old. In the quarters, the last voices sink lower. Sleep comes unevenly, but it comes. A blanket is pulled close. Coals settle into red. The air cools by a small degree. And in that hush, you can feel the endurance of those who lived here not as a legend, but as a presence. Not loud, not theatrical, simply steady. Steady enough to outlast the lies told about them. Steady enough to carry memory forward, steady enough to remind you, even now, that survival can be one of the most profound forms of human testimony. Now the sounds begin to thin. You imagine the cane fields resting in darkness, their leaves no longer slicing at sleeves, only whispering softly to the night breeze. You imagine the cabins holding warmth in small pockets, each one lit by fading coals and the slow rhythm of breathing. The river keeps moving, as it always has, without hurry and without sleep, carrying moonlight in broken silver across its wide back. The heat of the day has drifted away. The smoke has settled. The tools are still. Even the distant mill has finally gone quiet. In the hush that remains, You can almost feel tired hands unclenching, tired shoulders lowering, tired minds loosening their grip on fear for a little while. Not because the world has become kind, but because night has placed a soft cover over its sharpest edges. You think of gardens cooling under dew, of kettles washed and turned over, of a mended shirt folded near the bed, of a child tucked close beside a mother, of an elder whispering one last prayer into the dark, of songs no longer sung aloud, yet still resting somewhere in the chest, ready for another day. The plantation fades now into shadow and distance. The road disappears under moonlight. The cane becomes a dark sea. The cabins become quiet shapes under the trees, and all that remains is the sense of lives held together by patience, by care, by memory, by the deep and steady will to remain human through every season. So you let the night grow softer. You let the river carry the noise away. You let the darkness settle gently over the fields, the cabins, the road, and the water. And you rest with the knowledge that even in places built on cruelty, people made warmth, meaning, tenderness, an endurance that no empire of sugar could truly contain.